20 years ago, I was asked to read a paper to a group of people who were involved with death. There were social workers, psychologists, nurses, and so on and so forth. And it was really written with the idea of a discussion about professional people who are connected with people who are dying, actually. Their reaction to it, how they managed it, and so on and so forth. So it was sort of written as a stimulus for a discussion, and I hope that this is what will happen. I've modified the paper considerably, and in talking with Umberto, he said that he could even offer some suggestions from his experience with people who deal with the subject. And there's a historical part to it, which is what I'm going to be talking about. So, here's how it goes. Probably as long as he can remember, man has been fascinated with the subject of life and death, the most crucial issues of our existence. His orientation has been religious, philosophical, scientific, logical, in order to understand man's reactions to his mortality. Our professional bias has been primarily along psychoanalytic or psychological lines. The specific determinant of my contribution today was inspired by a paper of Max Schur, originally presented at the then Michigan Psychoanalytic Association some 20 years ago. And it was many years before the posthumous appearance of Max Schur's book, which is called Freud, Living and Dying. I don't know how many of you have read it. I have occasion to read it. It's a very touching book because he was Freud's physician, and he knew Freud very, very well, as you will see. So it was written before the posthumous publication of his book. This lecture was, and I wrote the paper before the book was actually published. Some ideas expressed in the paper that I'm presenting today were originally formulated as a result of talking with Max Schur and studying this material when it was subsequently published in his book. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but I will tell it the way it was. The final days of Freud's life were as follows. He was 83, and his cancer had progressed to such a degree that his general physical condition was completely deteriorating. On June 16, 1939, he wrote to his friend Marie Bonaparte, quote, "My world is what it was previously, a small island of pain floating on an ocean of indifference. Somehow, however, he managed to see patients until the end of July." In his biography of Freud, Jones, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that biography, describes Freud's terrible suffering from the destructive effects of the disease that had eaten its way through the cheek to the outside, and the septic condition was heightened. His exhaustion was extreme, and his misery was indescribable. He was extremely weak, and found it hardly possible to do anything. By August, his condition was worsening. There was such an unpleasant odor from his wound that when his favorite dog, Chow, was brought to visit, she shrank into the far corner of the room, a heart-rending experience which revealed to the sick man the best that he had reached. Jones writes that with all his agony, there was not the slightest sign of impatience or irritability. The philosophy of resignation and the acceptance of the unalterable reality triumphed throughout. This is what Jones. Now, 2 or 3 days before his death, on September 23rd, 1939, Freud asked Schur for Henri de Balzac's Peau de Chagrin. Now, Max Schur was in New York at that time. He had already back with him. Freud got in touch with him because he wanted him, who had been his private physician, personal physician, to come for his death, as it was. Now, he asked Schur, Freud did, for Henri de Balzac's book, La Peau de Chagrin. It's variously translated as The Magic Skin, The Woman Has the Skin, and some other things. This book Freud had in French, in his library. It was the last book he was able to read. Schur, who took care of Freud in his terminal illness, relates that when Freud had finished the book, he had remarked casually to him, "This is the proper book for me to read. It deals with shrinking and starvation." The same incident was also related by Jones, who writes that Freud had commented wryly, "That is just a book for me. It deals with starvation." He meant, Jones explains, the gradual shrinking, the becoming less and less, described so poignantly in the book. Books always meant a great deal to Freud. He did not read at random, Schur informs us. He carefully selected books from his library. Schur goes on to note how uncanny that he should have chosen to read this book before writing Fini, his own story. Let's examine the plot of this novel. Are any of you familiar with it? It's quite a book. Raphael de Valentin was an only child who was born in 1804. Both his parents were from, quote, good French families who had considerable wealth and social position. As a result of the political and economic strife surrounding Napoleon's rule and subsequent restoration, the family finances were substantially reduced, greatly. They lost legal case and so on. It's quite a story. When Raphael was around 10 years old, his mother died of consumption. His father raised him with a despotism as rigid as the rules of a monastic order. Raphael was 20 years old before his father gave him as much as 10 francs to spend. Ultimately, after he had promised his father not to gamble, his father gave him some allowance and began to treat him like a man. As the family fortunes deteriorated, Raphael wanted to justify his father's confidence in him. He became very frugal, denying himself any needless expense, so that in 10 months he succeeded in paying off his creditors. In the autumn of 1826, when Raphael was 22, his father died. Left with a very small sum of money, Raphael determined to budget this carefully while he worked diligently as a writer. Raphael's education is an excellent. He was well-rounded in the classics and had studied law, which, however, he did not practice. Instead, he determined to write 2 works, one a popular one, a comedy, which he hoped would bring him fame, fortune, and an entry into the social world. The other a serious psychological treatise on the theory of the will. In order to work full-time on his literary ventures, Raphael withdrew from the main current of society. Financially destitute, he found meager quarters in a little attic room of a hotel owned by Madame Gaudin, whose husband, a cavalry major in the Grenadiers of the Imperial Guard, had been taken prisoner by the Cossacks. Madame Gaudin had heard nothing from him for a number of years, but she believed, as it was rumored, that he had escaped, and she continued to hope that he would return. They had one daughter, Pauline, who at the time Raphael met her was about 14 years old. Now, Raphael lived in his room and worked on his manuscripts while being cared for by Pauline and by Madame Gaudin. Taking pity on Pauline, he obtained her mother's permission to educate her in the academics and in music. He regarded her as a child and treated her as though he were her brother. Coincidentally, he dreamed of love and sexual gratification and fantasies of having a love affair with a wealthy woman who would be completely surrounded by all manner of luxuries. Now, early in December 1828, he became friendly with Rastignac, who introduced him to Countess Fedora. She had been married to a Russian nobleman, but her marriage was not recognized by the Tsar. This lady, cold, vain, beautiful, and witty, was surrounded by many admirers, with whom she flirted extensively, but she would fall in love with no one. The author characterized her as the woman without a heart. Raphael fell in love with Fedora and determined to possess her. To save the money he desperately needed in order to entertain her, he starved himself by reducing his already extremely frugal diet and walked long distances, even in bad weather, to save money on cab fare. Pathetic picture. Yeah. He thought of pawning the gold frame around his mother's portrait. Pauline, who by now had fallen in love with him, arranged to leave some money around in his room so that he would find it and think it was his. One evening, after spending another frustrating time with Fedora, he walked home in the rain. It was so cold and wet when he came in that Pauline felt so sorry for him that she offered him some cream that she had been saving for her breakfast. Balzac draws a contrast between the kindness and adoration which Pauline showed Raphael and the capricious, different way Fedora treated him. On another evening, frustrated and lovesick, Raphael concealed himself in Fedora's room so that he could watch her undress. The sight of her virginal breast dazzled his eyes. He made no overtures toward her, but watched her sleeping, tantalized yet forced to endure her being so near and yet so remote. Ultimately, you're following the flavor of this very well, I can see. Ultimately, the relationship between Raphael and Fedora completely deteriorated and they parted company. By this time, Raphael's life and his affairs were in a truly disastrous state. Not only was he now completely destitute, but he was depressed because he had been rejected by this woman without a heart. As he was able to earn a little money from some of the writing he had undertaken on a commission basis, his friend Rastignac suggested that he gamble with him. Raphael would not do this, as he had promised his father not to. So he gave Rastignac some of the money to gamble for him. Rastignac was lucky and succeeded in winning 27,000 francs. With this money, the two men decided to engage in a life of debauchery. Raphael left his garret room and the two friends launched into a life of uninhibited pleasures of all kinds. Wine, women, generally squandering Raphael's money. As may be expected, after a short time, Raphael again found himself horribly in debt. He tried to raise money by selling the little island where his mother was buried. Balzac relates that this Raphael was signing the contract in the office of his purchasers and brokers. The gloomy depths of his room made him feel a cavern-like chill that caused him to shiver. He recognized it was the same cold dampness which had oppressed him beside his father's open grave. To him, this coincidence was a baleful omen. He thought he was hearing his mother's voice and seeing her ghost, for what other power could have made his name ring so vaguely in his ears against the background of tolling church bells. Soon the process of the sale of the island was spent. There was one remaining 20-franc piece. Raphael went to a gambling joint and house. He gambled and lost. Terribly depressed, he determined to commit suicide by throwing himself into the river Seine but decided to wait until dark. To pass the time, he went into the store with an empty corner and walked through gallery after gallery looking at various object art. He confessed to the owner, a 102-year-old man who appeared somewhat like a Mephistophelian character, that he was planning to commit suicide. The old man showed him a shaggy skin on which was the seal of Solomon, as well as an inscription in Sanskrit that read as follows: If thou hast me, thou wilt have everything. Thy life, however, will be my possession. God has so decreed. Wish what thou wilt, all thy wishes shall be fulfilled. But count thy wishes as thy life, for it is measured thereby. With every wish of thine, I shall grow shorter, even as thy days. Wilt thou have me? Take me. God will help. So be it. And now, let me give up my summary of Balzac's story by providing you with Webster's definition of what a chagrin skin is. It's a kind of an untanned leather prepared in Russia, in the East, from the skins of horses, asses, and camels, and covered with small round granulations by pressing small seeds into the grain or hairy side when moist, and when dry, scraping off the roughness. Soaking them thus causes the compressed or indented portions of the skin to swell up with relief. It is dyed in various colors, chiefly green.
No, I was just thinking the picture at Bradenton had hunted, so I was sitting there figuring out what they were doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let us now return to the plot thickens, as you can imagine. Let us now return to the summary of the story. The old man informed Raphael that the length of Raphael's life, represented by the skin, would shrink in proportion to the scope and number of his wishes, from the most trivial to the most extravagant. He went on to explain that as Raphael had intended to commit suicide anyway, his death was merely postponed. Although he was incredulous as to the mystic powers of the chagrin skin, Raphael accepted it, making an immediate wish for a banquet of real splendor, a bacchanal worthy of this century, a roaring delirium of debauchery. He ordered the sinister power to dissolve all joys into one. Balzac writes that Raphael then went on that he needed, quote, to hold every imaginable delight of heaven on earth in one final embrace, and then die of them. Therefore he wished for Priapic oaths after they had drunk, and songs to wake the dead, and kisses in triplicate. Endless kisses as echo would pass over Paris like the crackling flames of a conflagration, awaking married couples to stir them with sharp desire as in the days of their youth. Yes, even 70-year-olds. Just as Raphael left the store, he met three of his old companions who told him they had been looking for him and invited him to a party given by a wealthy man. Thus the old man's prediction about the magical properties of the chagrin skin had already come true. Balzac depicts the party in great detail, describing its utter lavishness, the sumptuous food, the exquisite wines. He goes into tremendous length describing all this. After the party, the men were introduced to voluptuous courtesans who set their senses on fire, and there were groups of entwined figures. The works. Toward the conclusion of the debauchery, Raphael drew an outline of the chagrin skin on the napkin, and then wished that he would be fantastically well. Shortly afterwards, a notary arrived, informing him that he had inherited some 6 million francs, with the sole heir of Major O'Flaherty, who had died in Calcutta. When Raphael hurriedly spread the chagrin skin upon the napkin where he had previously drawn the outline, found that it had shrunk. Both satellites. Raphael's eyes stared fixedly out of the blue, asking for what he saw before him was death. He began to feel ill and asked himself, am I tubercular? Didn't my mother die of consumption? From that point on, Raphael retired to a house kept by his old servant Jonathan, who became an intermediate authority placed between Raphael and the outside world. Jonathan acted as his foster father. Raphael arranged his life so that no wishes were to be made, as everything was planned for and arranged in advance. Jonathan was to think of all his needs and anticipate them. When on the rare occasion that he, Raphael, expressed a wish in the course of a conversation, regardless of how small it was, the chagrin skin would shrink. He made a strict rule that under no circumstances could anyone ask him whether he wished for something or whether he would like something. When such a statement would be made, Raphael would become very angry and cry, "Are you trying to kill me?" As he had to avoid the possibility of expressing any wish, the gratification of which would signify the shortening of his life. Raphael lived essentially the life of a recluse, surrounded by all manner of luxury. Quite by chance, one December evening, while at the theater, Raphael found himself face to face with Pauline. Some years had passed since they had seen each other, and she had become ravishingly beautiful. He discovered that Fedora, who was also in the audience with an admirer, was not at all apart from them. The following morning, with terrible anguish, he expressed the wish to the talisman that Fedora loved him. The skin did not shrink at this point, but that wish had already been granted, as Pauline had at that love him. Raphael, feeling that at last the talisman was a fake, felt free. He returned to his attic quarters where he had once lived and found that Madame Gauguin had moved in. And moved, for she was now a baroness. Her husband had returned and he was worth many millions. In the attic room, Raphael found Pauline and they expressed their love for each other. She told him that she had loved him for a long time and wanted to be his wife. They agreed they would be married in a short time. Realizing that there were so many things he wanted, he pitied Pauline. He measured how much life he had left and decided that he had less than 2 months. With a surge of fury, he seized the chagrin skin and threw it in the depths of a well. Due to practical considerations, the wedding was put off. It was set until early May. The couple, however, felt very sure of each other, kept away from society, spent much of their time together as possible, and were sexually intimate. Toward the end of February, a gardener brought in the chagrin skin which he had drawn up from the well in a bucket of water. Its surface was now reduced to less than 6 square inches. Raphael turned so pale that Pauline was concerned for his welfare. Realizing that her presence and his wishes for her had shrunk the size of the chagrin, he cried that she was killing him and begged her to leave. Following this incident, Raphael hopefully consulted a biologist, a physicist, a chemist, all in anticipation of stretching the skin to prolong his life. Each in turn tried what science had to offer, but each was unsuccessful. Raphael moaned in desperation, knowing that he was going to die. Pauline came to see him, calling herself his wife, telling him she had no fear of death. And she expressed the wish that they would die together in a final kiss. They made love. The next morning, Pauline told Raphael that she had listened to him sleep, and his breathing wasn't natural. There's a hollow sound in your chest, she said, that frightens me. And you have exactly the same little dry cough while you sleep as my father has, and he's dying of consumption. She was pleased that the disease was contagious and she would be able to die from him. From then on, Raphael's cough became progressively more severe and more exhausting. It was clear from the description of the symptoms that he was dying of consumption. Pauline hid her face in her hands, for what she saw before her was a hideous skeleton of death. Raphael's face seemed to have become ghastly pale and hollow-eyed, as the skull dug from a cemetery for the use of some anatomists. Several days later, more physicians were called for consultation. Despite their differences of opinion, they all agreed that a change of climate would do Raphael good. Following their advice, he went to a spa in southern France. His cough disturbed other guests, and they tried to get him to leave. In fact, the doctor lied to him about the climate and suggested that they go elsewhere. Raphael understood that the doctor was lying and determined to stay in spite. Always spite. Finally, a young man challenged Raphael to a duel because he could not leave the spa, and Raphael reluctantly accepted. The next morning he tried to talk the young man out of the duel, but the latter was determined. Raphael wasn't different because he knew that the shaggy skin would provide him with full protection. Shooting at random, Raphael hit the adversary in the heart. The talisman was now no longer in the smoke. Raphael left the spa realizing that while he had never accomplished anything in his life, he had achieved nothing for himself nor his fellow man. He went to live with some peasants on a mountainside and spent his time watching the scenery. Although he felt content that people knew that he was terminally ill. Realizing that his life was rapidly ending, he returned to Paris. Back in his own room, he looked at some letters from Pauline. They expressed how worried she was and how much she wanted to be close to him. He could not bear to have even the sight of a single letter, as it was too vivid, a reminder of his love and wishes for Pauline and his impending doom. He threw all her letters into the fire and insisted that she not be allowed to see him. Balzac left. It was now about midnight. Raphael seemed to glow with beauty as he slept. The calm repose of his face suggested a life in full flower. You might have thought him a child who had gone to sleep in his mother's arms. Pauline crept close to him. She was clothed all in white, her head leaning forward, poised lightly on the edge of the bed. She suggested an angel down from heaven. He begged her to leave him, telling her that if she stayed, he would die. She didn't believe him. Raphael brought out what was left of the shaggy skin, which was now fragile and tiny as a periwinkle leaf. He told her that he was dying, and there was little left of his life as there was the talisman, and that they must say goodbye. She thought he was delirious, and as she picked up the talisman and held it close to the lamp, Balzac writes, seeing Pauline before him, terror-stricken but so very lovely, was too much for his self-control, for he desired her more than anything else. He begged her to come to him. Balzac continues, a dreadful shriek burst from her throat, her eyes dilated, her eyebrows arched high under the shock of a horrible, unbearable anguish, for she could read in Raphael's eyes that raging desire to possess her, which had once been her proudest glory. As his desire flamed higher, however, she could feel the shrinking away of the chagrined skin tickling her hand. Not stopping to think, she fled into the next room and locked the door. Raphael begged her to open it, crying that he loved her and wanted to die in her arms. And with a burst of strength, he broke down the door and found Pauline half naked. She had unsuccessfully tried to stab herself in her heart and was now trying to strangle herself with a shawl. She gasped that if she died, he would live. Raphael pounced on her in an effort to possess her. Balzac continues. In his death agony, he sought for words to voice the passion that was consuming the leaf, the last of his strength. but nothing came forth but strangled gasps from his chest, seeming to have started from deep inside his body, each desperate gasp more agonizing than the one before. At the end, unable to utter a sound, he sank his teeth into Pauline's breast. Huddled over Pauline's body, Raphael's body, Pauline said that she had killed him by her fall. That's the end of the story. You can see why I thought of it, or why Freud thought of it. We readily recognize a number of parallels between Freud and Balzac. Freud and Raphael, the fictional hero of Balzac's novel. Both came from families whose economic means were originally substantial but subsequently deteriorated. Both men were interested in studying law, but neither pursued it to the point of making it a career. Both did a great deal of reading and writing and attempted to alleviate their hard-pressed financial states by earning some money doing so. Both were interested in psychology, worked on a series of books on the will, conceptualizing it in terms of a physical force. The anguish of their terminal illnesses was excruciating. Both men knew that their prognosis was hopeless, and that all efforts of medicine and science were of no avail. Both suffered from physical effects of their diseases, Raphael from tuberculosis, and Freud from cancer. Raphael's fame may be presumed, but his general physical deterioration and weight loss were graphic evidence of the ravages of tuberculosis. Balzac writes that his hero had the appearance of a hideous skeleton of death, and that his face seemed to have the ghostly pale and how it looked as a skull plucked from a cemetery. Raphael was convinced that his deeds and his ultimate fate were identical to that of his mother, who had died of tuberculosis. Freud was burdened by continual and repeated surgery so that his face became grossly disfigured. He was unable to eat and became extremely cachectic. Both men were shunned during the height of the illness, Raphael by society, against by his father. Freud, weeks before his death, by his own father. Yet there were important differences. Raphael was a young man in the very prime of his life who was facing imminent death. He was no longer poor, starving, or destitute. He and Pauline were very much in love and were planning to be married. Raphael was looking forward to a life that would fulfill his expectations. Some of his reactions to the knowledge of the inevitability of his death are described by Balzac in the most graphic way. The initial denial, the anger, the bargaining, and the depression were all there. With Raphael, there was no resignation or acceptance of the inevitability of his death, and his life culminated the most violent regression. At 83, Freud was an old man. His life was behind him. He had been successful. He was famous, highly respected, and had even achieved his wish to become a professor. He was married, had children, grandchildren, who had given him much joy. From what we know, Freud had been resigned to his death for some time. His cancer had spread and had reached a point where it was virtually inoperable. He was unwilling to subject himself to further intensive surgery along his life. If any of you read Jones's book on Freud, at the end had to do with the doctor's notes. Schur's, Jones recounts Schur's notes on the condition that Freud was horrible. We may surmise, of course, that the facts of old age, the physical suffering, the pain, and the knowledge of the hopelessness of his life condition, his condition was as well as the realization of having lived a full life, undoubtedly played a significant role in Freud's acceptance of the inevitability of his own death. We would assume that the reactions of Raphael, a young man faced with the inevitability of his own death, just when the prospects of enjoying the life ahead of him were the greatest, would be vastly different from the reactions of a man in his 80s who had already lived most of his life. And when we know from our clinical experience that emotions are neither based on rational factors nor age, and that the emotional maturity at any age, at any time, or under any circumstance, is a product of highly complex forces within the ego. We know, too, that there are many factors that affect the individual's ego strength, and with it the ability to tolerate all manner of traumata, whether from without or from within. Among those factors, probably the most significant are those that go back in time to the individual's early relationship as a child, and specifically to the early mother-child relationship. It is this relationship, based on love, that provides the child with the psychological wherewithal to develop the necessary ego strength to insulate him from the effects of trauma. We may postulate that the ultimate trauma and frustration is the incontrovertible realization that of one's own impending death. May we suppose then that under such circumstances the individual's earliest relationship to his mother plays an important role in how he deals with ending his life. We may recall that in 1911, Freud added a footnote to the interpretation of dreams in which he wrote, quote, that he had found that people who know that they are preferred or favored by their mother give evidence in their lives of a peculiar self-reliance and an unshakable optimism, which often seem like heroic attributes and bring actual success to their possessors. Later, in 1917, he expressed a similar idea at the conclusion of the paper on the childhood recollection of Goethe's in Wahrheit. He wrote that, quote, if a man had been his mother's undisputed darling, who retains throughout life the triumphant feeling, the confidence in success, which not seldom brings actual success along with it. Freud's statement was probably also autobiographical. He was known to have been his mother's darling, her golden Ziggy. May we suggest that his early relationship to his mother brought about an inner feeling of self-confidence and strength that contributed to his resignation about his death. If we apply Freud's comments about the importance of the early mother-child relationship for the development of ego strength to Raphael's reactions, we may arrive at a deeper understanding of them. Balzac has provided the reader with some very important determinants for these reactions. It is a significant fact, which has traumatic implications that Raphael's mother died of tuberculosis when he was standard. Our clinical experience reveals that the child often responds to a parent's death as an abandonment by the parent. That if the parent had really loved him or her, the parent would not have left. Raphael's implied conflicted relationship to his mother is expressed later in his life. Thus, it will be recalled that when he was financially destitute, he wanted to sell the gold frame around his mother's picture, and later he actually sold the island where his mother was buried. When he did this, he heard her voice, saw her ghost, and heard his name ringing in his ears against the background of the tolling of church bells. While the idea of selling the gold frame and the actual sale of the island were seemingly necessary from a financial standpoint, a good deal of Raphael's guilt about things is ambivalence to his mother is suggested. His ambivalent feelings about women are reflected in his portrayal of the two important figures of his life, Raphael. One, Fedora, hostile, cold, a woman without a heart. The other, Pauline, who is all giving, all loving, and in the end as if he was willing to sacrifice her life so that he might live. We have stated earlier that Freud indicated that Balzac's La Peau de Chagrin dealt with shrinking and starvation. Throughout his life, Raphael, the depressed hero, experiences a great deal of moral deprivation. Initially, he's destitute and starving. As a consequence of his poverty, he contemplates suicide, goes to an antiquarian shop where the aged owner provides him with a magic skin that would fulfill all his wishes at the cost of shortening his life. The first gratification that Raphael wished was for money that would provide him with an opportunity for bulimic orgy involving copious quantities of food and wine. Balzac recounts in detail many of the conversations during the party, as though this too was part of the oral pleasures. We may understand that the magic skin represents the mother's breast from which, or upon which, the infant can derive gratification of all his wishes. There is an underlying universal wish dating from earliest times in an individual's life for some magical power that would gratify all his wishes. A common theme in many stories and fairy tales. Quite understandably, the greater the need, the greater the desperation, the greater the tendency to regress to earlier stages of life. Virtually from the very beginning of the very dramatic ending of his novel, Balzac repeatedly refers to women's breasts and oral strivings. Fedora, the cold-rejecting, unattainable, ungiving woman, a woman without a heart, stimulates the hero by her body and specifically by her virginal breasts that dazzled his eyes. Raphael could only look at her, but never possess her. When he saw her again, a long time later, he found that she no longer appealed to him, a rather transparent reference to the change in attitude toward the original edible object as a result of maturation and development. Much of author's concern is with Pauline's significance for the hero. Originally, she's the child whom he teaches, that gives to her, but then as time goes on, their roles are gradually reversed, and she becomes the all-loving, all-giving, nurturing woman. She leaves him money and gives him some of her own breakfast cream. At the end of his life, Raphael longed to be in the arms of his beloved. Initially, his wish is clearly sexual, but the author quickly indicates that the wish is altered and is to be understood in a regressive sense. The wish is to return to or be reunited with his mother and the early gratification which he achieved at her breast. Balzac indicates that when describing Raphael prior to the final scene writing, you might have thought him a child who had gone to sleep in his mother's arms. Obviously, Raphael could not have his mother. He turned to Pauline to give him the kind of love that he had gotten from his mother at the earliest time of his life, when her nursing provided him with life-sustaining nourishment. Pauline, however, cannot gratify these needs of the dying Raphael. Like the vanished magic skin, the wish-fulfilling and life functions of the breast are no longer available. In the agony and despair of death, Raphael's reaction turns to violent aggression. His act of sinking his teeth into Pauline's breast combines the futile effort to forcefully extract from her the earliest life-sustaining nourishment that he had needed and received as an infant, together with a desperate fury and sadism against the breast that was disappointing him at the very moment of his greatest need. Of course, we do not know what Freud must have felt at the time of his life, when he had suffered from constant pain for which he only took an occasional aspirin tablet, and had the growing conviction that he did not wish to endure more. On September 21st, he said to Max Schur, "My dear Schur, you certainly remember our first talk. You promised me then not to forsake me when my time comes. Now it's nothing but torture, and makes no sense anymore." Schur indicated that he had not forgotten his promise. Freud sighed with relief, held his hand for a moment, and said, I thank you. And after a moment of hesitation, he added, tell Anna about this. All this was said without a trace of emotionality or self-pity, and with full consciousness of reality. Sure, it formed not a Freud of his conversation with Freud, as Freud had asked him. He writes that when Freud was again in agony, he gave him a hypodermic of 2 centigrams of morphine, from which Freud soon felt relief and fell into a peaceful sleep. The expression of pain and suffering was gone. He repeated the same dose after about 12 hours, and continues. Freud was obviously so close to the end of his reserves that he lapsed into a coma and did not wake again. He died at 3 a.m. on September 23rd, 1939. So, in talking with some of the people that had experience with children and people who died, this was, I thought, something that would be of interest to them. I leave it to you to talk about what you think about that, what Freud said and what he didn't say, what Freud did and didn't do, and so on. You had some experience, Umberto.
Unfortunately, yes. Yes, unfortunately, I had the painful task of having to deal with the death of some young people that were children of analysts who came to me in desperation, as you would imagine a parent is when you know you are losing a child, to try and help them not help them personally. They couldn't handle it. Obviously, very difficult to do that, whatever resources you may have, but what they wanted me to do is something they couldn't do, and that is to try and help the child through the process of dying. Now, these were not small children. Children are a different proposition. This was an adolescent, about 18, 19 years old. I have, unfortunately, I think 2 or 3 of these experiences. And what happened was this: when he was a small child, about 7 or 8, he had a tumor of the spine, which they removed and saw that it was a malignant tumor, but they thought that it was encapsulated and that they had removed it completely. And the child was fine for about 12, 13 years. Indeed, at the time that the thing returned, which was many, many, many years later, he of course developed, as you will imagine, a paraplegia, and had problems urinating and defecating, you name it. He was by then engaged to be married to a lovely girl, and this news fell on him like a ton of rocks, and indeed they fell on the family. Now this was a child of an analyst, and I don't know what difference that made. I think it made an enormous difference, because somewhat or somehow he was more reflective than most other people that I have ever met in that situation, and I have met quite a few adults dying. And in his case, like in Freud's case, there was an ability in the middle of all this pain and revolt and anger that he could not even get married to this woman that he so much loved, and was crazy about her, so was the girl about this boy. And so my job was to talk to him about his oncoming death. He was well aware of it, and he was obviously going through the phases that we are familiar with, of protest and all of that, but in a very well modulated form. In fact, I admired the kid, and it broke my heart to talk to him. And I could see his pain and that of his wife, that was a nurse in one of my units at the hospital that I ran at the University of Michigan, and so it was very real for me. You know, it was not only that this child was dying, it was that I was very familiar with his family, and they were close. friends of mine. But what's striking in what you say is that in a way he had a similar reaction to Freud. He could accept his death under protest. But what was striking is that he didn't have to use denial to deal with it, which is exceptional because that is what everybody does, use massive amounts of denial. In fact, if you think about it, even in psychoanalysis, the one issue that is never touched is the issue of death. It's essentially ignored. I mean, those of you that are analysts are probably well aware that the issue of your own death is hardly ever brought into the treatment by anyone, with some peculiar exceptions of people that has a phobia of dying, but that's a rare phenomenon in itself and it's not common. So it's mostly denied. With children it's not as much of a problem because, as you are aware, children until they are 11 or 12 years of age don't have a concept of this, don't understand this. Not that we understand this, we don't, because it's against our narcissistic makeup. You know, it doesn't make sense to us that we are alive and have to die. What we are alive for? And if you think about it, there have been all kind of efforts by our culture and civilization to try and deal with this. There are whole cultures, as you know, whose organization is simply based on the transition from death to the other life, the afterlife. Egyptian culture, for example, the pharaohs, the whole thing was based on the long trip, the long evening, moving from here to there. And as you know, the denial is of such proportions that at the beginning it implied killing all the servants, the wives, members of the family, and so on, so they were to accompany them in this trip. And it was not considered murder because they were accompanying him or her to a different place. And indeed, as you know, in other places the same was true. As you know, they have discovered in Egypt at the beginning they did that. Then they substitute that as a culture developed for figurines. Blue figurines are beautiful. I own 2 or 3 of them that were placed in the grave of the dead person, that were the servants that were going to help them, the representative of the families and so on, so that the servants didn't have to be killed. But as you know, in China, the emperors of China will kill thousands of people originally. Indeed, that is not unique to that culture either. And as you know, more recently, there were, enormous graveyard with figures. In this case, of course, it's sculpture figures of all kinds of things, warriors, armies, you name it, servants. They carry with them innumerable riches that were placed in their grave because they were going to be taken to the other place. And as you know, all of the pyramids in Egypt have been plundered for that reason, because there were incredible amounts of valuable things in there. If you think about it, that's nothing but a denial of, in other words, is the inability to accept that life has an end and that's it, that you are no longer anything. Of course, the problem is so enormous that whole religions, not only cultures like the Egyptians and some of the Chinese customs and so on, but religion has, among other purposes, the problem, among other reasons for its existence, its purpose is the negation of this, the denial of this. You don't die, you go to God later on, which essentially means you will live forever, which quite frankly is the makeup that we are born with. Our narcissism doesn't make any room for the idea of death. Freud was exceptional, and there are few people that are that exceptional. Most people deal with it by means of denial, and I have had to deal with dying people. Mostly some friends, some were just patients that happened to get sick and were going to die, and then I will go and see them at home or at the hospital or whatever it was, just to help them on the transition. And I can tell you, I never, except for that boy, I never met anyone that didn't use massive amounts of denial. Some of them were physicians, let me tell you, and knew exactly what they had and what the consequences of that illness were. They still were quite capable of using any number of forms of denial to minimize that and to say, oh no, this will pass and this will happen, and they are getting this thing from England that is going to solve this problem, and I'm going to get stronger, and all kinds of things. The question is, obviously, when you are in that situation, what do you do about it? Do you interfere with the denial, or do you support it? And what would you do? And I think that's a very individual matter. It depends who you are dealing with and what resources they have. Freud was different because, well, for many reasons. First, he was a genius, and that is a special condition that few of us suffer from. Being a genius, he was very interested in death and in these cultures and in religion and what the role of religion is. You see, when we are faced with the imponderable, we have to create a system to explain it and reassure our own certainty. And that's why the idea of God too probably is related to the fact that we don't understand how all of these things are here, how the world came to be, and though there might be a logical, rational, intelligible explanation somewhere that maybe one day will be found, in the face of that amount of uncertainty, we create what in other cases is called a myth or a legend of some sort to explain what happened. And one of the reasons is that if there is such a thing, then we can understand why all of this is here. And we can understand why we die, because we are not dying, we are moving to a different place and be in a better place and have a better life, which is otherwise makes death somehow a little more acceptable to some people, but not quite. It never really quite solves the problem. What is interesting with Freud is that, of course, as you remember, he dealt with the life and death instinct, and he had the mind of a biologist. He was a neurobiologist, really, essentially, originally. And being that, though that's not necessarily a precondition of accepting death, but it does help. He was more objective, more able to accept the reality of life, which means it has an end and that's it. There is no evidence that there is anything beyond that, except by the means of religion and whatever other set of beliefs we have created. Don't take me wrong, I respect whatever you choose to believe, but it is a question of what is it that all of this is doing for us. And I hope that for those that are religious and believe these things and the afterlife and so on, that all of that is true and that's what it will happen. I wish I could believe it, I don't. But it'd be nice if that was true, because it solves the anxiety of this enormous threat to our narcissistic being that we have to be terminated. by life, by the process of biology. Freud, obviously, because he was interested in the death instinct, and it acquired an enormous meaning to him. Hadn't been so for most analysts. Most analysts simply don't accept it at all, for many reasons. And I think one of the reasons is that we cannot accept death at all. So that is related to death. We don't want anything to do with it at all. It is nevertheless true that clinically have very little application. You can tell anybody that you lie at death instant. It doesn't make much sense. Though you can retranslate it into the aggressive drive and what it does in the stem as well. But in any case, because he was so concerned with the life and the death instant, I think he came to accept better than most people that life has an end, is a natural end, and that's it. Beyond that, he was a man of extraordinary character. Not all of us have the good fortune of being endowed with that type of character. And what you describe, Alex, is absolutely true. The agreement was many years before he died, when it was clear that there was a malignancy that it was not going to be, couldn't be cured. It wouldn't go away, it will come back, and it will end by killing him. At some point, he and Schur, which I knew personally as you did, and was an incredible person, and Anna Freud got together. That's many years before the scene you described, what he called Schur, and said, look, has no purpose anymore. Do you remember our agreement? Well, that agreement was a tripartite agreement. Anna Freud was involved in that, and she had to give the approval. And that's what Freud requested, that Anna Freud will approve it too when the time came. And he requested that from Schur. So it had happened many, many years ago. Now, that seems, it's interesting because, of course, at that point, when Freud talked to Schur, he said, tell Anna. Anna had to approve it. That's the agreement that they had. And of course, Anna Freud knew that that was the time and did it. Indeed, what you described is absolutely correct. That his dog, that was a child that he was very fond of, went into the room and smelled the odor of this lesion that he has in his mouth and ran away from him. And that brought to Freud, at that point, that was trying to do the best he could in the most painful of situations, the realization that there was no point in continuing with this painful kind of event. But I think that the fact that they had that agreement and that he had control over his death, in the sense that he had made an agreement with Anna Freud and made sure that they will help him out of this misery, was helpful. I think that's helpful. Because you would say, well, but anybody has control of the death. They can kill themselves if they so wish. But Freud couldn't do that. Freud was against suicide. He thought that was a cowardly act unless you were sick with melancholia or something like that, in which case it's an illness. But in the normal circumstances, he saw that as a way of running away from life, and it was a cowardly kind of act. So he couldn't do that. But it does help tremendously to know that you can make the decisions about your own fate. And I think that was very helpful to him, and I think it'd be helpful to anyone in those circumstances. Now, why are we so frightened of death? It's an interesting question that, again, analysts don't touch. And we are the people that should touch it. Because it's interesting. Why should we be so frightened of dying? And nearly everybody is scared, tremendously scared of dying. And there are some reasons that are obvious. One of them is that we are object-related animals. And that in order to die and be at peace with your death, one of the tasks that you must accomplish is to withdraw your cathexis from those that you love dearly and will have to leave behind. And not everybody is capable of doing that. I think it requires, again, a special character and a special kind of internal honesty and acceptance of the reality principles, to say, well, I have to leave them behind, I have to say goodbye to them now. And that's not easy to do. I think a lot of people, that's the major problem that they have, at least in the patients that I've seen in this predicament. That was the major problem they have. They could not. It's like with sleep. In order to sleep, you must withdraw your cathexis into yourself. If you keep attached to the world, you have insomnia. You keep thinking. You keep alive. You don't go to sleep. You don't die, so to say. And I think that that's what happens to many of these people, that they can make peace with the idea that they have to abandon and leave behind and say goodbye to all of these people. And that's a precondition for dying, I believe. It's interesting too, because, I have been involved with children for many years and have seen, fortunately, many children die. Being a doctor as well. And not too long ago, when I first came to Miami, to Tampa, I was asked by the people at the Moffitt Cancer Center to go and give them some kind of talk on, they were very upset because these nurses were dealing with children that were found to die. They had cancer, mostly leukemia or that type of form of cancer and so on, and all these children did die, and it was extraordinarily devastating to them because they get very attached to these children. And then the children slowly are gone, and it's like if somebody took a piece of the flesh and took it away with them, and they were very, very devastated. At the same time, they were incredibly angry with these children. As we are when somebody, because that's a counterpart of the phenomenon, when somebody dies that you are attached to, you never think, well, he died. You think he left me, or she left me. And there is an element of that is deeply embedded into your unconscious, and there is some rage about it. There is a kind of irrational fantasy that is telling you, if he really loved me, or she really loved me, she would not have died, she wouldn't have gone, because dying is going away. You understand what I mean? The feeling is, if they really loved me, they wouldn't have died. And that complicates the process of mourning. As you know, we have talked here about mourning, and there are some lectures on mourning on the web page, because as you are aware of, I have had an interest in all of these things for many, many, many years, probably since I was a little boy, for interesting reasons, which I am not going to go into any detail because it's none of your business. I will say this much. I, as a child, lost a very close friend when I was about 4 years old. And of course I couldn't understand it, except that it was a terrible blow. And it was a little black boy that used to be my playmate. I'm an only child, so it was very meaningful to me. I mean, it was like a brother to me. And probably the thing that most influenced my interest in this was the death of. That was it. An overwhelming kind of experience, to see this very young man that had been full of life, that was going to a university, getting a very good education, a very intelligent, capable young man, and lose his life and have this incredibly painful struggle with, and this was a struggle, giving up his girlfriend having to say, she's going to stay here, I have to leave it. I have to say goodbye to her and I have to die. That was incredibly hard for people. So, in summary, really, for me, it's a subject that is of great interest, which unfortunately is extraordinarily neglected, and I think at some point analysts should pay more attention to it and start to study the phenomenon, and not run away anymore from that reality. But because we have so many undesirable side effects, so to say, like what does it do to the religious belief, to the philosophical belief, and so on. So it's an interesting issue. You yourself may have reactions. You had a question.
Well, yeah, I remember being at St. Joseph's. Before I went full-time in private practice, I was at St. Joseph's Hospital and was one of the clinicians at the partial hospitalization program, primarily group treatment. And it was an interesting thing that the therapists would deal with the question of religion when it came up among patients very differently than with other subjects, because the general reaction was, well, that's something that we don't talk about. As opposed to, it's like everything. If it's interesting and important and on the mind of the patient, we talk about it. But there was something about that, and I don't know quite what that was about.
Well, as you know, I have written about it. For example, I wrote a very long paper called Children's Reaction to the Death of Important Objects. And I look at that at different ages and what it means and what it does to the development and all that. And generally speaking, as a therapist, that's what I was referring to earlier, you can have any set of beliefs that you want to, or that suit your needs, but you can impose that on your patients. So, with children, for example, frequently the families, and there are examples there of somebody that lived across from me, and I had two children, adopted children, who died suddenly, and the mother, was left with these two kids, and what to do with these children that were devastated by the death of this man. He was a neighbor, just across the road from me. His kids used to play with my kids, And she asked me, what do I do? And I said, well, you deal with it in whichever form you have taught these children about life and death and whatever you're religious. If you are religious and you're religious, you must. You're a Jewish person. And they have their own set of beliefs. I say that's what you talk about. If you are a Christian and a Catholic and you believe in heaven and hell and all of that, and that's what the children have been listening to, you don't go there. You tell them, you have to explain to them, you have to use a language that they speak, and that's the language of the culture, of the knowledge that they have been acquiring. Whether that knowledge is factual or is mythical, it's irrelevant. That's the way you deal with it. So in a way, I can see why therapists don't want to get in there in a group, because you do have to respect whatever set of beliefs that person has, whatever they are, and though you may think that that is, another form of denial, that's not a place where you want to go. You don't want to argue with that. In fact, I will respect that, and I will play along. It's like with some psychotic personalities, that if you want to relate to them, you have to get into the delusional system in order to be able to help them. And this you do the same.
But this is precisely what the therapists were not comfortable doing.
The therapists were?
This is precisely what the therapists were not comfortable doing. In other words, when the patient would want to bring up their belief system, the therapist would...
They don't want to discuss that.
It was sort of like religion and politics in this group we don't talk about.
Well, that's a big mistake, because most people when that time comes, at least in my experience, which I have some, but obviously it's limited, needs to use whatever resources they have acquired through their life, and an important resource, if you are a religious person, is your religiosity. Whatever set of belief you have. I don't care whether you are a Muslim and you think that you're going to go to Allah and he's going to have 15 virgins for you there if you become a martyr. I don't care. I wouldn't interfere with that at all. Because that's not the time to do it. Nor do you have any right to interfere with that. You know, you don't have any right to interfere with the system of belief of anybody. The only right that you have is the system of belief is used for neurotic purposes, then you can point how they are using that for this purpose or that purpose or the other purpose. But you don't interfere with their beliefs, you understand what I mean? But with children, that's particularly important because that's the only language that they will understand and that you can speak to them. But that very little girl, I think she was 4 at the time, 4.5, I forget, something like maybe even 5. She very quickly will say, oh, my daddy is dead, you know, and seems to have accepted the fact that the father died. But then on her birthday, that was 6 months down the road or something like that, the mother came and crossed the road. She only had to cross the road to go to a psychiatrist sort of consultant and knock at the door in real despair that the little girl was very, very upset. And I said, what is she upset about? And she said, well, she's upset because it's her birthday and her father had not sent her a present or a card or anything else. But you see, we have contributed to this because what we taught her, or what the family taught her, what religion teaches us, is that death is not the end of anything, it's a translocation. You are in a different place, and if you are in a different place, why the hell you don't think of me? You know what I mean? And that is quite a problem. That's quite a problem. So it's really very interesting, but we neglect it tremendously. One of the groups that we should make here is one on death and dying. Psychoanalysis on death and dying, you know, it's because it's so neglected. There are certain things that, for some reason, it's not the only one. There are others, but that's perhaps the most significant one. That generally speaking, patients don't bring into the treatment, and analysts tend to avoid, because we are part of the culture, you know. So it's not only either, you know. Dealing with your own death, dealing with the deaths of people that are close to you, that is incredibly difficult. Give you an example. When I was a medical student, the son of the dean of my medical school, which was a young man, was about to graduate in a few months, developed some form of hepatitis. Being a little silly, instead of taking care of himself, he went on partying and drinking and so on. And of course, he developed an atrophy of the liver and was in a coma. Now, the father was an eminent physician. His father will tell me, Umberto, don't you think he's doing better today? Doesn't he have more colors? He had a little pinkish. I think he's doing better. Don't you think he's doing better? And of course I say, yeah, I think he's doing better. I see what you mean. He has I know he was dead. That nobody survived and liver atrophy of that type. It's called, I don't know what the term would be in English. It was yellow atrophic liver in Spanish, which means you are gone. There's no way of reversing that. But he had sent, and I have seen this in other occasions, to England for some shots that they were saying that maybe will be helpful. Maybe. Of course they were not, but his father was absolutely convinced that as soon as the shots will arrive, the injections will arrive from England, that his son will be all right. You know, say, oh no, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. You know, tell his friends that he'll be all right. I mean, this medicine is coming from England. Will be here tomorrow afternoon, and then he'll be. Was insane. This completely insane. Because you could see that this man, like the physicians that I have seen dying and have been relating to them when they were dying, you could see on the one hand the knowledge that was inexorable, that death was there and knocking at the door and there was no way of turning away. And maybe in the next minute you saw an enormous, massive amount of denial. He was an analyst in Miami. Was a very bright fellow, and unfortunately developed a carcinoma of the pancreas, which, as you know, is lethal like hell, and it's a hell of a death because you die cachexically. It's a terrible death. And he went undiagnosed for a certain amount of time, which is not uncommon because people think that maybe you have diabetes or you are pre-diabetic and all of that crap. And I called him on the phone. It was near Christmas, and I have heard that he was very sick. In fact, my friend away, his friend told me he's not going to survive much longer. He's close to death now. So if you want to see him, come. So I called him and talked to him on the phone, and he was fully alert and quite capable of telling me, if you see me, you wouldn't recognize me. I look like a concentration camp victim, and completely, he told me the weight, I think it was 80 pounds or something like that. It was a strong, very large, not very large, but a hefty kind of fellow. And so he was very aware that he was dying. But you know what he told me in the next 5 minutes? He said, you know, I think I'm going to call what do you call it, a mason, fellow that does build things with bricks and so on, because I think I want to start seeing some of my patients. I'm going to make a division in the living room so I can have a little office in there and I can see them. You see what I mean? It was incredible. He had just told you that that he was gone. He will not live very long. He knew that. He will tell you that. In the next breath, that wasn't there. He was telling you, I think I will call this man and build this partition here so I can see some of my patients, you know. As if what he told you before did not exist any longer, you know. And that's not uncommon. I have seen that many, many, many times. So it's interesting because it not only applies to your own death, obviously more so, I think, but it applies to the death of people that are very close to you.